and hopefully that is now recording. Okay, so my name's Hilary McCollum. I'm chair of Women Aloud NI, and this event is part of our Festival of Women's Writing, which has been going on since Saturday. And I'm also a PhD student at Queen's, so it's great to be working with people at Queen's to bring you this panel on why women's writing matters. If you want to put questions in the chat as we go through, then please do. The format's going to be that we're going to have Allison speaking first, and then Dawn, and then Moira, and then time for discussion. But feel free to put questions in the chat or comments in the chat as we go through. So I think that's all I'm going to say by way of introduction, and I'm going to get straight on to introducing Allison Garden, Dr. Allison Garden. And she's the only member of our panel that I haven't actually met in real life. So it's nice to at least meet her virtually. Allison's research interests encompass a number of aspects of 20th century literature. She's currently working on a project about love across the divide, and beyond academia, she's worked with the BBC NI on the subject of illicit love in Northern Ireland. And she's going to be talking to us about contemporary women's writing, romance, and teenage girls stroke girlhood. So I'm just going to hand you over to Allison, and thanks so very much to all our speakers who've agreed to take part tonight, and to all of you for being here, and I hope we're going to have a great time.
Hi everyone, thank you very much, Hilary, for that. Let me just see if I can share my screen. It says one participant can share at a time. Ooh. Can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, so thank you very much indeed to Hilary for inviting me, and thank you very much everyone for attending. I think we can all agree that after the news stories this week, writing by, about, and for women matters more than ever. It's such an honor to be in such esteemed company with my colleagues, Moira and Dawn. We're all at Queen's together, where I'm working on a project, a social and cultural history of mixed marriage or love across the divide in Ireland. Aha. One of the most important resources is the enormous number of literary depictions of love across the divide, and in particular novels about this. In fact, you're probably familiar with such novels. I've put a selection up on screen here. The form became especially ubiquitous during the Northern conflict that has become euphemistically referred to as the Troubles, second only to the thriller in terms of the numbers produced, and there are some obviously that twin both the thriller and the love across the divide. Despite being exceptionally popular with readers, these love stories have received limited attention from academics. You might be surprised to learn that where critics have engaged with the form, they have tended to engage with novels written by men. Cal and Eureka Street, for example, have gained significantly more attention than Jennifer Johnston's Shadows on Our Skin or Joan Lingard's Across the Barricade series. And of course, these critics are more interested in clamoring to determine what this book might say about the politics of its author or discuss its depiction of violence, rather than engagement with the novel's romantic plot and what this might reveal about politics. Whenever I encounter these sorts of academic arguments or the critical silence surrounding these texts, I can't help but think about Virginia Woolf's comments on appropriate literary subjects as far back as 1929. War is an important subject according to literary critics. The feelings of women in a domestic setting are not. There are several observations we might make about this. The quotation seems to establish the notion that critics believe war does not permeate the domestic space or affect the lives of women when it clearly does. The second, that women are not an important subject for literature or criticism. In 2021, this attitude is still pervasive. From the fact that men are more likely to only read books written by men, and parents of boys are likely to only buy books with boys as lead characters, to the fact that male actors get over twice as much dialogue on film as their female counterparts. Researchers are still working through what the statistics look like for trans, gender fluid, and non-binary folk, but I'm pretty sure we can all make a good guess as to what these statistics will look like. And if we have a cultural problem with sidelining women, our attitude towards girls is even worse. Indeed, our attitudes towards girls are so neglectful that I actually really struggled to find an academic quotation to sum up this point. Now, usually when academics want to make a contentious point, they use another academic to do it. And so-and-so argues this to add clout to their argument. I thought I'd be able to find a really nice juicy quotation to start us off with and be able to launch right into my argument about why girls writing matters, or writing about and for girls matters. But actually, I just couldn't find an example that cut right to the heart of what I wanted to say. Scholars have explored how academic writing about girls and girlhood has only really started happening in the past 3 decades, but they tend to examine critical neglect of girls in academic work rather than the cultural attitudes towards girls. And this speaks volumes, I think. Instead, I had to pull up my own examples from popular and political culture. I found that the ways in which girls are talked about is often, to be frank, appalling. So let's start by thinking about Greta Thornberg, the Swedish climate activist who was named Person of the Year by Time magazine in 2019. Look at how Donald Trump responded to this news. So ridiculous, he tweeted, labeling her resolute commitment to her cause an anger management problem. Trump has form here, and you can see his patronizing and sarcastic response to her UN speech in the tweet below. Trump's comments on Thornberg might be especially shocking for their ableism, but he's not the only man to take issue with Greta's age and youth. On Fox News, Michael Knowles called Thornberg a, quote, mentally ill Swedish child. There are others who have patronized Greta, including Vladimir Putin, who said, nobody explained to Greta that the modern world is complicated and complex. The Brazilian president called Thornberg a brat in a hugely offensive and demeaning move. And elsewhere, we find men clamoring to devalue the culture associated with girls, assuming that girls have poor taste or that they are unimportant. And to argue this point, I had to turn to the words of the pop star, formerly of One Direction, now turned actor, Harry Styles. In an interview with Rolling Stone's Cameron Crowe in 2017, I should note, Styles was asked about proving, quote, his credibility to an older crowd. And I think we should read that as absolutely not teenage girls. Styles knew this question was laced with all sorts of sexist and ageist assumptions. So he responded by challenging why we felt that girls couldn't be trusted as serious cultural agents in their own right. Styles says, who's to say that young girls who like pop music have worse musical taste than a 30-year-old guy? That's not up to you to say. You gonna tell me they're not serious? How can you say young girls don't get it? They're our future. And this isn't the first time that a music journalist has demeaned teenage girls or their intelligence. In 2015, Jonathan Heath wrote that teenage girls don't care about the Rolling Stones. They don't care about the metamodernist cycle of cultural repetition. They don't care about history. Indeed, all they care about is boys who can turn teenage girls into rabid, knicker-wetting banshees who will tear off their own ears to get what they want. The misogyny here is absolutely blatant. The sexuality of a teenage girl turned into something monstrous and wild. But there's also something in the way in which Heath is able to so glibly homogenize girls and disregard the intelligence of young women. Underpinning this dismissal is, I think, a genuine anxiety about female sexuality and agency in a patriarchal society. If we look at the language used by Heath, he relies on the difference of raising third-person plural pronoun they. They are all the same. None of them are interested in history, despite the fact that more girls than boys take history at A level and more women than men study history at university right up until PhD level, although only 26.2% of history professors are women in the UK and only 20% in Ireland. The subtext here is clear. All young women are foolish and lacking in intellectual curiosity. Many academics would argue that this tallies with our cultural and historical tendency to ignore girls until puberty, when they became of interest as potential wives and mothers in the heteropatriarchy. The feminist critic Luce Irigaray argues that in psychoanalysis, girls are not gendered until puberty, and the effect of this, she maintains, is that girls are almost completely effaced in Western cultural consciousness. Because they are not written about, in the beginning, she writes, there was only a little boy, they do not exist. Catherine Driscoll, a professor of gender and sexuality studies and a leading expert on girls, also argues that historically, girls have had no social role to play until they were brides and then wives and mothers, and therefore did not exist in the cultural imagination until they became women. And if girls or women did not marry, they had no public role at all, staying at home to help with the housework, child rearing, or other domestic activities. As our ideas of childhood and adolescence have changed from the late 19th century onwards, girlhood has become more of an identifiable phenomenon and much more visible. This means that we see girls having a public presence in popular culture and even excitingly in politics, Greta Thornberg being a great example. This also tracks with our changing patterns of marriage and child rearing. Unlike in the past, puberty no longer means that a girl is ready for marriage and motherhood. It's an extension of childhood that we feel slightly uncomfortable about. The academic Susan Cahill sums this up perfectly, arguing that, quote, girlhood as a category between the more manageable spaces of childhood and married womanhood tends to embody society's anxieties. Although girlhood is notoriously difficult to define and a slippery concept, I'd argue it could be any age between about 8 and 18. It is now a recognizable status. But even while we can acknowledge the presence of girlhood as separate from womanhood, there is still, as many scholars have noted, a tendency to homogenize girls rather than allow for their own individuality. We might see this tendency as a hangover from the past, where girls did not have any public presence and quite simply did not exist in our cultural imagination. As Driscoll has argued, male adolescence is historically a journey to subjectivity. Female adolescence is historically a journey to motherhood. Heath's comments also alert us to precisely the anxieties that girls can generate. The language here is completely dehumanizing, rabid like a dog infected with rabies, wailing like an undead banshee, willing to inflict severe bodily harm on herself. This belittling image is intended to deliberately undermine female sexuality and desire. This has historical precedent too. The word hysteria coming from the Latin hystericus, meaning of the womb, leading to millennia of associating madness as an affliction that is particularly likely to affect women. This ferocious hyperbole gives us a vision of teenage girls that is truly terrifying, a violent, infected member of the living dead. That this idea of teenage sexuality is so horrifying should not really surprise us, given that narratives about romance still privilege female chastity and virginity as especially important. If we think about recent and highly successful programs such as Richardson or Normal People, our male romantic lead is permitted a sexual past where our teenage female lead is absolutely not. This is one of the key conventions of the romance genre, where the power of female devotion and love saves a bad boy from himself and reforms his promiscuous ways. Heath's flippant comments reveal a profoundly reactionary set of values, that all girls are the same, that they do not understand cultural history, and that their sexuality is something anxiety-inducing that needs to be controlled. But against this homogenizing impulse, I give you the radical power and joy of fiction for and about girls. Instead of demonizing and demeaning the tastes and desires of teenage girls, I argue we should take them seriously. With what remains for the rest of the talk, I'd like to think a little bit about these texts for and at least partly about girls. It might seem an odd selection of texts, but all are written by women and all feature girls in a prominent way. The first two are very consciously love stories about the North's community divide, and although it's not a driving plot line in Lisa McGee's Derry Girls, there are certainly moments exploring this. And for me, the ability of these girls to desire differently across the so-called twin blocks of the Northern statelet is powerful. It suggests that these girls will become women with the power to resettle the shape of Northern society. And I do think that stories for and about girls are especially important within the North too. The Belfast-born writer Lucy Caldwell, who writes brilliantly about girls and girlhood, has spoken how the Northern Ireland she grew up in was very male-dominated. male politicians, male religious leaders, male soldiers on the streets. And the academic Caroline McGuinness has noted how novels and films based on the Troubles often foreground teenage male protagonists. Even accounts of transgression, such as the joyous film Good Vibrations, focus on teenage kicks, which are almost exclusively male. The political scientist Yvonne Galligan has labelled Northern Ireland an armed patriarchy, and we all know that the imprint of Northern Ireland's social and religious conservatism disproportionately affects women and girls, people of colour, and the LGBTQ+ population. I think it's really important when we're thinking about people of colour. Amnesty International NI revealed yesterday that people of colour were 9 times more likely to be fined than their white neighbours over COVID violations by the Police Service of Northern Ireland. And recently, Maggie Scull and Amy Walsh have written about the gender disparity with regards to NI's lived and academic histories, political and cultural. Caldwell laments that this has led to a situation where it seems that only certain stories are worthy of being told. But Caldwell insists there are plenty of stories that have not yet been told. In wanting to write, Caldwell says about, quote, sisters, about the intense friendships girls have in their teens, stories of children questioning their gender, of 2 girls falling in love, exactly privileges these small stories. And this is hugely important, she says, because everyone wants to see themselves somewhere in fiction. We are all desperate to find characters that we can relate to. And this is where these texts become so vital. I anticipate most of you will be familiar with the joyous and riotous irreverence of Lisa McGee's Derry Girls, countering deeply ingrained ideas that women and girls aren't funny. Joan Lingard's Across the Barricades, published in 1972, is the second in a series of 5 novels charting the love story of Protestant Sadie and Catholic Kevin. In the 1970s, the violence of the Troubles was escalating rapidly, and the literary response was predominated by poetry and the thriller. Lingard's decision to write a children's book set in Belfast was radical, and one that she was advised against. The enduring popularity of these stories is evidence of the clear hunger from young people to see themselves on the page. Widely read across Ireland, both North and South, as well as England and Scotland, I've also been told that the novels have been on school curriculums in Switzerland and Germany, translated into dozens of languages and read globally. The novels are rich with normal everyday life. Endless cups of tea, plates of baked beans, the smell of chipped fat, the chatter of women collecting in doorways, children playing in the street, and the relentless boredom of unemployment as disaffection ferments into unrest. In Sue Diven's Guard Your Heart, published next month, nearly 50 years after Across the Barricades, the novel's teenage protagonists are depicted as politically astute and aware, with a clear sense of their own political identities and their own developing moral consciousness. Iona, the teenage protagonist of Guard Your Heart, is the daughter and sister of a police officer who falls for a teenage boy, Aidan, from the other side of Derry, whose brother has links to dissident republicanism. Despite threats of violence from within her own community, she just makes up her own mind about Aidan and follows her own convictions, whilst remaining resolutely committed to her own values. Narratives that privilege and center young people, especially girls, reveal how much emotional and domestic labor goes into sustaining and supporting families through conflict. Ellie Davis's criticism has shown how it is girls and women who shoulder the burden of this work, and how the radical power of care is shown to have a transformative effect on men within these domestic settings. Far from passive and ignorant, the girls at the center of these texts are engaged, dynamic individuals. They are feisty and funny. They have big dreams. They can like boys or girls, and also books, music, art, history. If I was giving a different sort of talk, I might pause here to delve deeper into these texts, to look at language and character, plot and genre. But the title of today's event is Why Women's Writing Matters. And I really wanted to tease out what is at stake in writing about and for girls. There's something so powerful about creating a space for girls to just be. There's a move to decry woke culture and our insistence on the need for safe spaces, but this is clearly so essential even now. And it's vital the spaces are made for girls to dream, to feel joy, to share time and energy with other girls, to see girls living happy, rich, full lives, even if they're complicated, as all lives are. And we clearly can't make physical spaces safe for girls. So at the very least, we can open up emotional and intellectual safe spaces for young women. If I'm honest, even I was shocked by the comments that I found from men about teenage girls. Their horror at their burgeoning sexual identities, their refusal to engage with their views, their inability to recognize their intelligence. Writing by women for and about girls gives young women a chance to see themselves and their peers reflected back at them, their stories taken seriously, given value and meaning. Thank you. Oh, that's a different slide.
That's been a great start. I mean, I'd be asking you about 50 questions already, but I'm going to not ask you anything. I really have enjoyed that paper, but in order that we have plenty of time for other people to be able to contribute in the discussion, I'm going to take us straight on to Dawn. And, you know, it's almost like we planned this. The first time I saw Dawn was on campus at Queen's, and I thought to myself, she looks like the kind of woman I should know. And I'm very happy that we have become friends over the course of our studies. Dawn's a writer and a researcher. For those of you who don't know her work, I'd very much recommend her poetry collection, The Stack of Owls is Getting Higher, which is available from No Alibis and other outlets. She's currently completing her PhD in creative writing at the Seamus Heaney Centre, which combines her own prose poetics with the study of the work of Elizabeth Bishop. And she's going to be talking to us tonight about the creative aspects of her PhD and her thinking behind it. So I'm going to hand you over to Dawn. Unmute yourself.
Got it. I'll get it yet before the end of the night. Yes, hello, and thank you very much, Hilary, and Women Aloud for inviting me to talk a bit about my creative writing as part of my PhD this evening, and my process, I suppose, as well. I'll begin with a bit of background on myself, and then I'll talk briefly about my research into the stories of Elizabeth Bishop. Then I'll discuss the collection of poem stories that I've written as part of my PhD, which is set in North Belfast in the 80s and is told from the perspective of 4 young girls. I'll finish by reading a 5-minute extract from one of them. So yes, my name is Dawn Watson. I'm doing my PhD at Queen's in Belfast. I grew up in North Belfast before I moved to East Belfast as a teenager. During the years between when I was 13 and 18, I moved house 16 times, which is a whole other story, to be honest. And I'm writing a book that is rooted somewhere in that experience, separately from my PhD, supported by the Arts Council NI. I was and have been a journalist and a sub-editor in national newspapers in London, Dublin, and Northern Ireland for around 20 years. In my 30s, when my son was 3, I decided to go to university to study English with creative writing as a mature student. I had a bit of a disrupted childhood in many ways, and I didn't go to university as a teenager. I'd always wanted to go, and I always felt like I should go, like it was my calling, if you like. But for many different reasons, I just never really prioritized it. And I think that is true for maybe a lot of women. When I did eventually apply, I had been out of education for so long that I needed to do a 2-year access course at the Belfast Met. I was pretty devastated and I felt the weight of time just bearing down on me. But I gutted it out and I started as an undergrad in Queen's in 2014. From there, I went on to do a master's in poetry and now, of course, the PhD. So it's been a bit of a journey for me to get to this point. When it came to choosing what I should focus on for my PhD, I found it very difficult to decide. I'd always thought of myself as a fiction writer. I'd always intended to write a novel. The idea, I think, of writing poetry at all as a human adult in the real world, it just didn't really exist as an option for me during my undergraduate years. I mean, it never really had, I guess, in my life. I'd intended to drop it at the first chance I got and focus on prose. I think poetry always felt like an awful thing that belonged in classrooms and left behind in childhood. So I wasn't expecting what did happen, which was this giant pull towards the potential of what seemed to exist within poems. And that for me was a compression of emotion, a compression of the moment. Really, poems seemed to me to be little machines that once they were unlocked, revealed more little machines within them and more within that. And getting on board with the tools of poetry, things like rhythm and rhyme, they seemed to add dimensions to writing that didn't really exist in prose alone. It kicked off a process of evolution within my own writing that made me curious to combine the compressed precision of poetry with the narrative possibilities of prose into potentially a new type of writing, at least for me, that felt like it better communicated that sort of fragmented experience of emotion and memory. And that overlapping of forms is essentially the focus of my PhD. My thesis is titled Strangely Alive, Poetic Prose and the Art of Story Writing. As an overall project, it's broken down into two parts. A creative side, which I'll get into in a second, and a critical side, which focuses on the poetic short stories of the American poet Elizabeth Bishop. Although her genius as a poet is well known, not as much has been said about her short stories. Bishop would have referred to a pursuit of a theory of a story all of my own. She was interested in where prose and poetry intersect, and she wanted to develop a new method of story writing. I'm particularly fascinated by her construction of the perspective of the child in her story In the Village, which continuously overlaps the genres of prose and poetry. The story is biographical and tackles the days leading up to when her mum was taken away to a mental asylum when she was 5 years old. Bishop never saw her mum ever again. So ultimately, both elements of my PhD will communicate with each other, and that interaction will come together as a single piece of research. The other side of my PhD is a creative project, and I've written a series of 4 poem stories that are set in Protestant working class North Belfast in the 1980s. The collection is called We Play Here. They're written from the first person perspective of 4 12-year-old girls, and they map out the geographical area that I spent the first 12 years of my life, which was Ashfield Gardens off Glandore, Skegnall Avenue in North Belfast. It was an area that was just peripherally touched by the presence of the British Army and impacted fully by poverty and neglect. It's an area that is extremely underdeveloped to this day, with many of its streets and pockets untouched, even by the very notion of gentrification. I was speaking with a friend recently after there was a bout of sectarian intimidation in the Grove Park that had made the news, and he said about the area, it's an eerie place, eerie for the outsider. I wrote it down when he said it because I felt it was very true. It is eerie for the outsider, but also the insider. Growing up there as a child, I carried this sort of heavy suspicion of unsafety when I played in its wide, completely barren parks. They were just kind of frightening to me, particularly the Grove Park, which was this vast kind of empty sea of grass where I found myself subjected to intimidation and even attacks a few times. I remember once having my shoes stolen. Also prominent to me was in Alexandra Park, sitting as it did on an interface we cut through to get to the supermarket. I also remember being followed home one night by a man when I would have been about 10. I was the last person to leave the corner shop, and the street was very dark. And it seemed that when I quickened my footsteps that he did the same. I remember I crossed the road over and back and over and back to check if he really was following me. And again, he did the same. I suddenly panicked and I sprinted as fast as I could over the road and down my street, pausing just to look back only when I had reached the safety of my front garden. And then at the top of the street, the man was standing completely still, just staring at me as I closed the gate. You know, many of these incidents were very peripherally present as I revisited the area in the collection. I physically revisited the area as well when I was writing it by driving over there, parking the car, and just actually sort of tracing my steps through the places I would have played when I was a kid. I didn't write about these incidents directly, and it's not a biographical collection, but certainly the hard feelings of fear and unsafety coloured all of the poems. The 4 poem stories are written from the point of view of 4 female friends. There's Nell, who imagines the streets around her to be made of water under the pressure of grief after the death of her father. There's Sam, who suffers from OCD and channels her haunting home life into an investigation into a local bogeyman called the Hatchet Man. There's Max, who comes across a murmuration of starlings in a park that follow her home and then plummet to their deaths in the street in the night. And then Ellen, who looks after a mother with severe mental health issues. This final story sees all 4 friends connect and come together to look for Max's dad, who has disappeared. All the poem stories are located in a kind of stitched together, sort of imaginative version of a North Belfast that was then. And just as the genres of poetry and prose overlap in the writing, the speakers in the collection are rooted in an interconnected map of streets, parks, waste grounds, and alleyways. The poems, I guess, they aim to reflect that interiorized sort of lived experience and that vast imaginative landscapes of the resilient child, and how they stand in communication with their socio-geographic environment. They're stories of normalized violence against girls and women, of fear and the resilience born out of it. I wanted to construct the perspective of the child in the context of an ongoing trauma, environment of trauma, landscape of trauma. And I wanted to do it within a sort of queering of the poetry genre, taking the themes of prose, you know, such as a central character, a sort of a storyline and what have you, but making them in fact, to a poem in 4 parts. So I'll finish by reading an extract from one of the poems. It's 5 or 6 sections from the final poem, which is called We Ghost Tigers. The speaker in this story is Ellen, and together with the 3 friends from the preceding stories, they go on a hunt for Maxine's dad, who has gone missing. There's hints that the disappearance may be paramilitary related, although it's never explicitly stated. The 4 friends' search always feels kind of destined to fail. However, finding the dad is somehow never really the point of the adventure. And I like, and you know, just like in the book that inspired it in many ways, which is The Body by Stephen King, which was about 4 young boys, the real story is the necessary resilience born of their connection with each other as girls. So yes, on to the story. So I'm going to start at section 11. I probably should have done a screen share. Actually, it would have been maybe nice for people to see it, but it's too late. It's too late now. I'm going to read section 11 to section 16. Okay, 11. Nell and Sam scuffed up to the black foot of the tree. Have you checked for your dad in the Grove Park? Nell asked. We knew why, she asked. The men died there all the time and were found swinging by kids and people cutting through to the big furniture shop, or for Mr. Whippy in the Shore Road petrol station. Even someone's mum got beaten and stuffed in a bush. Sam said, are you sure he's not asleep in the house? Or did he go on holiday? Max pulled her top lip down as far as it went. Could he be lost in the town? I asked. Nell hopped 3 steps, kicked a stone at the stream. Sam stared, squeezed her right arm with her left hand. Max pushed her lip between her teeth and bit down. Let's check the park first, she said. We squeezed back under the fence, one by one. 12. It was almost 2. We split past 2 concrete bollards down the overgrown lane. We ran across Premier Drive and cut down the long entry behind Fort William Parade. It was overrun with nettles, brambles, and puddles. We ducked a taut washing line stretched from a yard to a tree. One time, Nell's brother ran straight into it. He made a soft "hurr" and saw both feet at eye level as he was thrillingly snapped to a halt. 13. No one spoke as we emerged, darting past traffic on Skegneel and down the wide Jellicoe Avenue. It was long and full of nice houses on one side. Once I was skipping when a Rottweiler sailed over a fence and grabbed a blonde girl by the arm. It shook her, and a car horn beeped long flat honks as though that might stop the dog. Over the street was Grove Park, as wide as the sea, its green pointed railings forced and bowed into gaps by kids who had slipped through before us. 14. Inside was a stretched out monstrous expanse, treeless save for a scattering of sycamores shrugged to the edges. It was like arriving on the moon. We agreed to split into pairs to look for Max's dad, then meet after at the playground. Me and Nell watched Max and Sam walk away tilted in the wind across the huge football pitches to the perimeter. The peeling clubhouse in Brantwood football ground peeked through the gaps in the tree line. A dog chained outside a grey cuboid council building barked beneath private keep out signs and razor wire. There were 2 football boots thrown in the roof, attached by knotted laces. One landed on its studs. One was lying on its side. A pile of wet sand lay between us and the grass. Nell's cousin Noel told us of some kid who tunneled inside. It collapsed on her and she died. 10 men dug out her small body after the bookies closed. They left the sand. 15. You couldn't see from one end of the park to the other. There were no benches for people to wait on or talk at. It was a blueprint for a future park. The freezing wind would force you across the vast grass to a flat horizon that fell away to a steep hill. I leaned back on the wind like a cushion. If you were on your bike, you'd be pushed fast forward until you gushed like Niagara Falls over the line, down a cascade of small hills to the play park. But if you forced yourself to stop at the top, to stand still, to dig your heels, to drop your bike, to bare your hair cutting in your eyes, to feel your unzipped coat buffet and your shirt collar whip your cheeks, you could beat it. You could beat the push, the wind, and the endless grass, and just stand up before everything lying ahead of you, holding space where grass meets sky, framing the giant harbour beyond. 16. Nell and I stood staring at the docks. She took my hand. The clouds were heavy, lying on top of twin yellow cranes. Parked cruise ships, grain tanks, blue metal outhouses, Thompson's animal feed mill, curved white plastic roofs, small pink derricks, the burnt red brick Jenny Mount mill at North Derby Street, chimneys, big waste pipe pointed at the sky, Sinclair Seaman's church spire peeking out on the dark corner of Sailor Town. The headstrong smell that blew up across and through the sky grass letterbox, framing everything, was the stuck salt from the Irish Sea, mixed with the fixed and thrilling musk of the feed. If you went on round the corner, you'd land down the York Road on top of Gallagher's cigarette factory, and because of it, the whole city smoked. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there.
Oh, that was wonderful, wonderful. I'm so glad that you've read some of your work. I think I'm not going to be the only one who's going to be looking forward to that being completed and available for us to buy. And as with Alison, I could be asking you a million questions already, but I'm going to take us straight on to Moira, so that we do have time for for our audience to ask you all some questions. So Moira is Professor of 18th Century and Romantic Literature at Queen's, and I should be probably telling you all about her very impressive academic achievements, of which there are many. But from a personal angle, Moira was actually the first person that I contacted about the possibility of doing a PhD at Queen's, and she was so helpful and so encouraging in her response, and has been on the times that I've encountered her since then. And I've spoken to other students, and that's been their experience of her too, that she's been a very, very supportive person in their work. And I think academia doesn't always acknowledge enough how important that is for students, and that actually it's often women who do that for students. So I just wanted to acknowledge the importance of that for me and for other students that I've known. So there are very many academic achievements also, but I have not focused on them tonight. So the topic of Moira's talk tonight is early women's writing, and particularly the rise of the professional woman writer in the 18th century. And I shall hand you over to Moira.
Okay, and I'm giving you a sneak preview of my earlier slides. I hadn't got that signed up. Can I just say very quickly, thank you so much, Hilary. I'm genuinely touched. I couldn't have thought of a nicer introduction. Thank you so much for that. So I am genuinely really delighted to be here with you this evening, and thank you, Women Aloud, and particularly Hilary, for asking me to join you. So I am going to get rid of some of the videos so I can see everything here on the screen for myself. Okay, so why women's writing matters, the historical view. So I started here with an image of a woman reading. Sadly, there aren't very many visual images from my period of women writing, and I wanted to choose this one, sketched by Angelica Kaufman, really because this obviously isn't a woman of particularly high status. There's nothing in her clothing or in the setting to suggest particular wealth, because I want to say at the very beginning that writing was an activity in this period enjoyed by huge numbers of women, including many working class women. Not all of them got published, although very many did. And I want to show that to you tonight. So in women's writing, why is it important? Why does it matter? Well, like others have said, and indeed some of you have said in your videos, which I was watching just before joining tonight, obviously we do see a particular focus upon female experience. And I want to give some varied examples of that kind of particular view. And so I'm going to begin with Frances Burney, who wrote a 12-page letter to her sister, giving a really rather graphic account of undergoing a mastectomy. We get lots of detail. We hear about how 7 men in black arrived, 5 doctors and 2 students, how she shouted for her women to stay. They allowed 1 woman to remain with her. A handkerchief was spread over her face, and she saw, but still she could see the glint of polished steel through the thin material. And obviously this was surgery performed without anesthetic. And yet, of course, she lived, and she lived to write about the experience. And she wrote this letter, amazing letter, to her sister. Now, this is very much in my thoughts this week, because with my 3rd years this week, we've been reading Maria Edgeworth's novel, Belinda, in which a really important central figure, Lady Delacour, prepares herself for mastectomy and suffers from breast cancer throughout that account. So then moving on, we've got Lady Mary Wortley Montague, who travelled with her husband to Turkey in 1717, 1718. And among her accounts, she writes about visiting the Turkish baths in Sofia, where she saw about 200 naked women gathered. And she's incredibly proud of writing her account, because this is a view of Turkey that no man has ever witnessed before. And although she's writing in the form of a letter, she was clearly gearing it up for publication as a travel account as well. There's enough stylistic things to show that to us. So let's move on to marriage. So my example here is from a novel by Eliza Haywood, The History of Miss Betsy Thoughtless. And in this scene, I'm not going to read it, I don't have time, but in this scene, the husband, Munden, murders the squirrel, the pet squirrel of Betsy Thoughtless. So just pick up the last line there. With his whole force, he threw the squirrel against the carved work of the marble chimney. Its tender frame was dashed to pieces. Now, it's clearly bad enough in itself that he would kill the pet squirrel, but this is clearly a coded allusion to abuse. A few chapters later, he's going to pimp his wife to a friend, and we do get accounts of domestic abuse and sexual assault in many of our fictions by women in this period. But not all marriages were so unhappy. So here's a poem by Anne Finch, Countess Winchelsea, written in 1685. I'll just read the opening lines. This to the crown and blessing of my life, the much loved husband of a happy wife, to him whose constant passion found the art to win a stubborn and ungrateful heart. And to the world by tenderest proof discovers, they err who say that husbands can't be lovers. Moving on, we've got lots of examples of representations of female friendship. It's a really, really popular topic for our poets in the period. I've given you here an excerpt from Frances Sheridan's novel, Memoirs of Miss Sidney Biddulph. And Sidney is writing to her childhood friend, Cecilia, and writes, our names, our virgin names, I find cut out on several of the old elm trees. This conjures up 1,000 pleasing ideas and brings back those days when we were inseparable. But you are no longer Rivers, nor I Biddulph. Then I think what I've suffered since I lost that name, and at how remote a distance you are from me, and I weep like a child. Or we have Mary Lepore, who was a labouring class woman writer. She worked as a domestic servant in a country house, and here wrote all of her poetry from that perspective. And this excerpt gives us that kind of sense of her longing for a life of the mind and a life of literature, but also the reality. And it's slightly surrealistic. I'm particularly fond of this one. You see, I'm learned, and I show it the more, that none may wonder when they find me poor. Yet Mira, that's her name for herself, her poetic pen name, yet Mira dreams as slumbering poets may, and rolls in treasures till the breaking day. While books and pictures in bright order rise, and painted parlours swim before her eyes, till the shrill clock impertinently rings, and the soft visions move their shining wings. Then Mira wakes, her pictures are no more, and through her fingers slides the vanished oar. Convinced too soon, her eye unwilling falls on the blue curtains and the dusty walls. She wakes, alas, to business and to woes, to sweep her kitchen and to mend her clothes. We have no portrait of Mary Lepore. She died aged 24 from measles. So I've just given you a generic kitchen maid portrait from roughly contemporaneous instead. And the last of these examples is a poetry about motherhood. Joanna Baillie's A Mother to Her Waking Infant. Now, Baillie herself never had any children, so I'm not really making an argument about kind of biological and always direct. It's about perspective, and that she would write this poem. I haven't got time. I wanted to give you a flavour of a lot of the different writings, so I'm just going to read the first stanza. Now in thy dazzling half-oped eye, thy curled nose and lip awry, thy uphoist arms and noddling head, and little chin with crystal spread, her helpless thing, what do I see that I should sing of thee? The crystal spread is the spittle. So we've got some poetic, a bit of poeticism there about the spittle. So all of these are describing, you know, life through female eyes for sure. And obviously second wave feminism in the 1970s onwards was particularly interested in what women of the past wrote about what was then perceived to be female domains, love, courtship, marriage, motherhood. But then a recognition grew of the huge variety of women's writing from the period. Indeed, there isn't a single domain that I can think of that women didn't actually, some women or one woman didn't actually write in that mode. So just to give quick examples of that, I would say from the world of politics, I might cite De la Riviere Manley's political satire. You can see, I'm rushing you through these slides, but you can see she was actually arrested and imprisoned for a short time for this satire on Whig politicians of the day. So this was in 1710. Or I might cite Aphra Behn's novel Orinoco, about an African prince who's brought as a slave to South America. Or I might cite Eliza Haywood's The Female Spectator. It's a really varied, miscellaneous book, but in this issue in particular, the April 1745, there's a letter from a writer encouraging women to go out into the countryside with microscopes and to survey nature and to look at insects and contribute to the advancement of knowledge. So it's a kind of interest in early science. Or Charlotte Smith's poem, The Swallow, ostensibly about the bird, but actually engaging with debates about, very contemporary at the time, about whether swallows hibernate or migrate. And although they're finely poised in the poem, you can see that she is throwing her weight behind the theory that the swallows do indeed migrate to warmer climes. So she was on the right side of that debate. I think that's my last one there, yeah. So feminist work has wanted to recover women's writing from this period, and this kind of work began in the 1980s, and it's accelerated really ever since, and really building up momentum, particularly in the last 20 years. I think, though, it's difficult to get the message across of the huge extent of women's writing that has been rediscovered. So when I'm teaching, I usually start from what people will know. So I'll ask, well, you tell me what women writers you know of from this period. And obviously we've got Jane Austen. A lot of people will say to me about Austen. Quite a few might say Mary Shelley, and maybe some will say Mary Wollstonecraft as well. Occasionally some will say Aphra Behn, because she's often held to be the first professional woman writer. So what I mean by that is someone who really wrote for a living. That was her form of employment. That's literally what put bread on the table. And I think that view that she was the first professional woman writer is probably underpinning a Woolf's comment here, again from A Room of One's Own, Alison quoted earlier, interestingly. And Woolf wrote, "All women together ought to let flowers fall upon the tomb of Aphra Behn, for it was she who earned them the right to speak their minds." But we need to be very careful of talking about firsts, because Aphra Behn is not the first professional woman writer. I might go much further back and go to Christine de Pizan, a very prolific woman writer of the early 15th century. Now, she's not writing in the English language tradition, which obviously is what I work in, but I did want to draw attention to this book in particular, the Book of the City of Ladies, because it's remarkably similar to the premise of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. So I'll just read what I've written here in the slide to give you a flavour of what this manuscript book is about. So Christine, aghast at the misogyny so evident in the books in her library, is visited by three heavenly figures, Reason, Rectitude, and Justice, who help her to build a city of ladies, where women of virtue, skill, and merit, drawn from historical, literary, and biblical sources, together with contemporary and indeed future women, can reside. Now, famously, Woolf wrote about Shakespeare's sister, who was denied the kind of opportunities that he was given. But Woolf didn't need to invent a sister in many ways for Shakespeare, because, of course, there were so many historical, real women writers contemporary with him. And indeed, those numbers were to grow exponentially. So I'm going to turn to the statistics now. If we look at the period 1780 to 1820, it's recently been argued that the number of identifiable female novelists exceeded the number of identifiable male novelists. And that's what we're seeing in this graph here. So the red line at the top is our women novelists. The blue line in the middle is our male novelists, and the line, I think it's kind of black at the bottom, is novels written by authors who remain anonymous. And actually, it's a very interesting graphic, because you can possibly see that at one point, the red line dips and then is overtaken by male writers. And there might be a very simple reason for that. obviously all these things are complicated, but if we were going to give a simple answer, we'd say that reason is Sir Walter Scott, who made the novel a very respectable genre for male writers, and then identifiable male authors would take off in the 19th century. Now, clearly, maybe there's a lot of things that work here. Maybe being published by a woman is a marketing ploy at a time when novel reading was really identified with women as well. Or maybe sometimes the adoption of female authorship, or proclaiming, being open about being a woman publishing a novel, might have been about trying to encourage a gentle review. But certainly, a lot of statistics back up the real prevalence of women at this point. So here's another one. Between 1770 and 1830, Michelle Levy argued in 2013 that 900 women wrote 1,402 new books of poetry in this period, and that 1,375 novels are now known to have been written by women. So, we might have once thought of the anonymous female poet, for example, toiling away in obscurity, fearful of putting her name before the public, but very clearly that's more myth than reality. And there's another one from Backscheider in 2001, that after 1720, women authored 51% of published literature. Now, I hope you'll agree with me that these statistics are really quite astonishing, particularly because so few of these women are remembered beyond the ones that are sort of the highlight names that maybe I've already identified. And I'll tell you a very quick anecdote now about going to a major women's writing conference a number of years back in Chawton House, which is a centre for early women's writing. And Isabel Grundy was giving one of the keynote lectures. And Isabel Grundy is a fabulous critic of 18th century women's writing. She wrote a great biography of Lady Mary Mortney Montague. And in a wonderful spirit, I thought, of generous self-deprecation, she told this story. She said, in the 1980s, I was approached about writing a chapter in a book on 18th century women's writing. And I said to them, I'm not sure I can do this because I'm not sure there's enough material for a chapter. And that's really where we've come, because at this conference, obviously multi-day, 3-day, hundreds of paper, hundreds of participants from all over the world. So that's quantity. So now I want to go on to, well, were these writers any good? And you'll see, I'm just going to pick out a few quotations here from different periods. That one's actually managed to be obscured. I'm going to actually move on to 1786. In a review of Charlotte Smith's poetry, the reviewer said, a very trifling compliment is paid to Mrs. Smith when it is observed how much her sonnets exceed those of Shakespeare and Milton. Or in 1788, another anonymous reviewer in the New London Magazine said, I augur that the 18th century will long be looked back on as the epocha of female glory. Or Mary Robinson, writing in 1799, talked about how the best novels have been produced by women. The purest and best translations from the French and the German languages, again, women. Women have also been translating from the classics. And then she goes on to talk about drama and poetry as well. Of course, it would be equally mistaken to argue that the period was some kind of ideal moment. Recognizing female success and achievement has to be balanced too with the recognition that there were many difficulties that women had to overcome. In 1795, for example, in her first published work, Maria Edgeworth, here it is, Letters from Literary Ladies, Maria Edgeworth defended women's right to literature. And this was actually a response to Thomas Day, a family friend, actually, although he had died at this point, no accident. And so this was a response to Thomas Day's belief that women should not be authors or taught to read or to think, indeed. So these letters dramatize the debate between two gentlemen. So the first, who's obviously the Thomas Day figure, is uneasy with women's increasing access to public debates as readers and writers. And then the second gentleman defends women's right to literature. He argues that a symptom of modernity is progress, and that progress is technological and social, but women's education is the index to progress. And this was actually a widespread view in the later 18th century. It was a very enlightened argument. And this gentleman says that, and it's obviously Edgeworth writing in the with this sort of fiction of the two gentlemen writing letters to each other. The second gentleman says that women's freedom will be won through the art of printing. Women cannot be driven back to their former state of darkness. Their eyes are open, they will read. And interestingly, he compares printing technology to the invention of firearms. He says guns and modern print culture both make women's inferior bodily strength irrelevant or invisible. Only minds matter in print. Now, Edgeworth was the most commercially successful novelist of her own day, and also the most prestigious novelist of her heyday, and that's broadly 1800 to 1814. For this novel, published in 1814, Patronage, she earned £2,100, and that was 3 times the amount that Sir Walter Scott got for Waverley. I was feeding this figure into a historical currency converter. There is such a thing online, the National Archives in Kew. I'm not exactly sure how reliable it always is, but it's quite interesting to take a look at what these sums of money might mean in today's terms. And it tells us that perhaps this 2,100 is about £100,000 in today's money. But I wanted, as my last example, to turn to someone who didn't make nearly so much money from her writing, and that is Olivia Elder, because there's a local connection here. Olivia Elder's poems were never published, but they're gathered and collected in a manuscript volume in the National Library of Ireland in Dublin, and published recently, edited by Andrew Carpenter. And she clearly was hoping to get these poems published because they're gathered, copied in fair copy. So I think she was anticipating publication. Olivia Elder was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister living near Coleraine, and in one of her verse letters, lots and lots of poems addressed to female friends, but in one of these, she laments how she can't spend her time as she would like to do. She'd like to be writing poetry, but instead she's forced, and so I'm going to read you out this list, okay? Instead, she's forced to undertake the following tasks: building a turf stack, boiling potatoes, brewing, baking, pickling, washing dishes, cleaning out ashes, lifting pots, cleaning shoes, mending clothes, herding cows, sewing, knitting, killing a goose, spinning flax, whitewashing a wall, and gardening. She also had to hang stockings on the line, make butter, mend clothes for those working on the farm, and empty chamber pots, while she would much prefer to be writing poetry. And she articulates all that in about 124 lines of verse. So just to kind of sum up and conclude the kinds of things I've been thinking about in relation to this section of tonight, why women's writing matters. I think why women writers matter because they were important and successful in their own time, both individually and collectively. They offer us glimpses of life we would not otherwise see. They unsettle our ideas about women and women's writing often. They often, although not always, of course, advocate for feminism before the term was invented. And they were also talented in their own right. I can put hand on heart, and I always say this to my students, that I don't teach any women's writing that I don't enjoy and admire in equal measure. So that's me finished. I'm out of sharing.
That's been another wonderful paper, and I think we've covered just such a breadth of topics. And I guess that's, I suppose, one of the things I find about women's writing, and I think Moira touched on this. You know, women write about everything that there is to write about, and they aren't just pigeonholed in one area. I'm going to ask people to start putting questions in the chat, and then you can ask it yourself. It's just because of the numbers. If you're just putting up your hand, I can't see you. Or if you just shout out, then there could be too many shouting out. So if you could start with putting questions in the chat. I mean, maybe I'll start with a question just for Maura and Dawn, and Alison can jump in. Why do you think within academia there has been so much emphasis on the writing of men? compared to the writing of women until, you know, this last period, since second wave feminism in the 70s. Why is that? Why is that focus when there have been great women writers previously?
I think, you know, we need one of my 19th century colleagues here with me as well. I think us who work in the 18th century broadly think that the Victorians have quite a lot to answer for. One of the things I think in teaching 18th century literature in particular is that we tend to think, oh, this is what it was like in the mid 19th century. So 100 years earlier, it must have been like even more that case. So I think all our ideas about you know, writing in the past of you know, like historical women's writing actually are very indebted to kind of 19th century models. We just have to think about, you know, the most famous thing about women writers in the 19th century, sadly, is that the most famous of them wrote under male pseudonyms. And I work really, really hard to actually say to my students, do you know what? In the period I teach, some men wrote under female pseudonyms. So, you know, it's about kind of not just assuming that you know the past, you know, you can't always do that. But I mean, there's a lot going on, Hilary, there in the question. I'll be really interested to hear what Dawn, and I bet Alison has a view as well. I think also the question about quality is something to get around. I do find sometimes when I'm doing outreach work with women's writing, women who've been forgotten about, you know, I have been asked that question, you know, but are they any good? You know, so yeah, they were there, but were they any good? And I think that was Dawn. So I think there's a lot of lack of knowledge, and there's a lot of kind of active forgetting going on. And I'm not, you know, although my talk is probably very positive, and you know, in lots of ways, another way actually I'm very gloomy, because it's very hard to get the message across, I think, about how many of these women there were and how successful they were in their own day. It wasn't all this narrative of difficulty. There's an awful lot to celebrate as well, but we just forget it, you know.
Dawn or Alison, is there anything you want to say on that?
Just speaking within, I suppose, poetry, which is the kind of landscape that I've been in, I think that often, you know, what we're taught is so canonical, and there's a big emphasis on the canon and who you know, the sort of, you know, the kind of the huge figures throughout history. And I mean, in parallel, it's like a master chef, and one of the contestants cooks a beef stew, and they're like, it's very tasty, but is it a beef bourguignon? And it has to be judged to how much red wine it has in it, and you know, according to the canon of French cooking. And I think that it's just such a good question now, and I see it in real time. I think, having come through my masters, and I see the lecturers and the team at Queen's very conscious about bringing in more women writers, and you know, people like Evan Boland, you know, for instance, the Irish poet, you know, who passed away recently. And I think just you see these folks who I feel have never really had, I guess, just the same kind of spotlight. And maybe it's habit, and maybe it just reflects society as a whole. But I do see a curve, and I see a sort of an arc pointing towards the changing of that.
Alison, I can't see you at the minute on my screen, so I don't.
Hello, I am here.
Oh, great.
I'm sorry if I drop out. I'm having internet problems, so I disappeared for a few minutes, but I am back. In answer to that question, Mary Celeste Carney has written about the development of girl studies, and she said that the problem was there were too many men working in universities, and they just wanted to recreate themselves in their academic research. So that's why girls and women's studies has been slower to develop. But I also think it's about the fact that women were denied an education and weren't educated to the same level that men were for such a long time. If we go back to Virginia Woolf, she writes about it so well in A Room of One's Own. But I also think it's to do with, if in my talk I was trying to talk about this idea of public and private, and women were kept, largely women and girls were largely kept in the home, and there's this idea that what happens in the home isn't of interest, and these aren't the big stories, so you know, who cares? We'll have 16 biopics of Winston Churchill, but we won't look at his wife, or you know, what women were doing in their homes. And my colleague Ellie Davis, I think, is in this call, and she's a brilliant critic of domesticity and how it can be really radical in a space that's worth looking at. So I think it is about what we deem important and the types of narratives that we want to explore.
think just one thing, I'm going to be a bit cheeky as chair's privilege, but I think one of the things that strikes me is that still a lot of men, Moira referred to this, a lot of men won't read books unless they're written by men, but a lot of male reviewers won't review books written by women. Like even now in 2020, 2021, there are some male reviewers who seek out books by men and tend not to review books by women. And I think academia has been dominated until the last kind of 40 or 50 years by men, and criticism has been dominated by men, and maybe that's part of why you've got so much dominance of men within the canon. I've had a fantastic question from Madeline. Did you want to ask that yourself?
Yeah, okay, may as well. Yeah, it's just really to get a recommendation. This is kind of part of my research anyway, so kind of getting the experts to weigh in. Can you just name one or more women writers from here that you sort of admire or would really recommend people look at? Maybe people that aren't so well known, possibly. So just go ahead, whoever wants to weigh in.
Well, I can go first. I loved Sue Diven's new novel, Guard Your Heart, which is out next month. It's a brilliant young adult novel, but I think there's lots in there for not young adults. Am I a middle-aged adult, or I don't know, for adults of any age. I also love Lucy Caldwell, who I mentioned in the talk. She writes so well about girls and the specific challenges facing girls and women, I think. And then I've also there are 3 new critics in writing, living here and writing about the North. Ellie Davis, who writes brilliantly about homes and domesticity. Maggie Scull, who's a brilliant religious historian, and Amy Walsh, who's writing really interesting things about republicanism and feminism and how they intersect or don't, or cultural history of that. So those are my creative and critical recommendations.
I'll say quickly too. I was thinking, oh, how am I going to just say one? And then Alison allowed me to say 2. So I'm going to take one contemporary and then go back into my my research interests in the 18th century again. So I guess my contemporary would be to say, so she is well known actually. So my contemporary one's well known, that would be Sinead Morrissey. So I really enjoy Sinead's Morrissey's work, and I'll tell you a few things about why I like it so much. I think that it's brimming with it's brimming with intellectual curiosity. So she kind of finds out really interesting material and approaches it in really interesting ways. I mean, I think you can see she obviously researches kind of topics, but then wears it very lightly. And then at the same time, there's a real kind of presence of her own self as well. I'm a little bit biased because, you know, I know Sinead as well, but I also think that it's poetry of integrity. You know, there's it's that combination of the openness to the world, but also rooted and cited in her own kind of framing of that I really, really like. And then I suppose, I mean, you say from here, I mean, lots of Irish women writers I like, and some of them, not all of them in the 18th century, like Kate O'Brien. Land of Spices, probably one of my top 5 novels. So she's not contemporary, but she is Irish. And then, yeah, Olivia Elder or Mariah Edgeworth or Elizabeth Sheridan. So I said I would only say 2, and now I've sort of said, now I suddenly thought actually I'll say something about Elizabeth Sheridan because I didn't mention that one in the talk at all. So yeah, fiction writer, sister of Richard Brindley Sheridan, who of course is so much better and well known. And her work isn't really in print, but one of the novels has come back into print recently. The Triumph of Prudence Over Passion, which is a very off-putting title, but it's a really, really enjoyable novel. It's very like Austen, so, and it's very, I teach it alongside teaching Austen, so. Elizabeth Sheridan, sorry.
Dawn, is there anything from you?
Yeah, I guess it's hard one to say who's well known and who isn't. Leontia Flynn is a hugely well-known name, I think, amongst academics and poetry fans alike, but I didn't hear about her poetry until I was in my mid-30s. And it was actually a poem by Leontia Flynn that would have inspired me to think again about poetry and think, you know, maybe you mean you can write about this stuff? You mean you can be cheeky? Like, I mean, she kind of writes about, you know, there's things like mental health, you know, there's family, grief. You know, the first poem I ever read of hers was Gerard Manley Hopkins. And it talked about bipolar, it talked about super sares, it talked about wild grief, but in a really funny, blunt sort of way that is very unique to her. But I just honestly didn't realize that that's what poetry could do. It could take the things that are very, very difficult and write about them with humor and I think tenderness and insight. So I would say if you haven't heard of Leontia or you haven't read any of her stuff, I would say to check out, you know, some of her earlier collections like Profit and Loss or These Days. She is my PhD supervisor, but that is not colouring anything. Similarly, my other PhD supervisor is Gail Mcconnell, and she's another Northern Irish writer that I would say to look out for if you haven't. She released a sort of collection recently called Father Mather, and the sort of the umbrella of that book is queer parenthood, which is something that I would know a bit about as well. So it was just to see her, you know, bring out that sort of a thing was super important to me. So both those guys, I would say, check them out if you haven't.
Fantastic. I'm just going back up to, is Kate Lynch want to ask her question herself? If we've got Kate Lynch with us.
Yeah. So I'm currently doing coursework for my A level, and I'm just wondering what your views are for how men tend to write women, especially I'm focusing on the novel Great Expectations and how Charles Dickens seems to write women throughout it. Is there any comments on that?
So just to make sure everybody heard that, so you were cutting out a little bit here and there. So it's views about how men writers, and especially 18th and 19th century men writers, have written women. And maybe kind of following up on that, I'll be cheeky and kind of take over Kate's question. I'm also interested if you could talk about how women write male characters and what women bring to writing male characters. So if we could have maybe both of those, if you could come at those. And whoever wants to go first, just jump in.
I definitely wouldn't. I'm not about to say that, you know, that they're poorly written, you know, and obviously there would be some who might want to argue that, but I absolutely couldn't say that. It's not something I've actually really done meticulously. You know, like a study and put them beside each other. I can't remember, somebody said earlier, I think even maybe it might have been Hilary, you said, or maybe it was in your video that you recorded. I have watched those earlier that you said about women writing about men. Yeah, I think you did actually in your video, women writing male characters. And I think we want all these things, you know, we want all these perspectives. We want as many perspectives as we can. So I wouldn't certainly, I don't know my Dickens well enough to say particularly about Dickens, but you know, male authors have written about women very, very well. I mean, one of the big success stories of the 18th century is Samuel Richardson's fiction, and he writes about women all the time. The two big books, Pamela and Clarissa, the first two of his 3 novels, are centered on women and written from their point of view. You know, they have first person narration and so on, and they were really, really successful, and they were really crucial in actually, you know, really feminizing the novel, this kind of sense. I mean, in the 18th century, the novel is a female genre. It's women, it's associated with women readers, and it's associated with women writers as well, but there are men writing fiction too. So, you know, men can write well, women, I think, very, very well. I think really, if you're interested in doing it, and I think it was Kate, was it, in your current work, really the thing to do would be start quoting some of it and let your reader or us know what you think about that. You know, what about this passage? Is this a successful working? I think probably we need to come down to in my view, we need to come down to quite a granular level and look at specific, you know, examples.
Do Alison or Dawn want to come back on that question?
Yeah, so when you're talking about, one sex writing as another, the first novel that I read as a teenager that really had this huge impact on me was I Am Mary Dunn, and it was written by Brian Moore. And the character in that book, is it's this very interiorized space of the within a woman's head. And I think I haven't read it in years, but she's sort of teetering on the brink of fearing like she was, collapsing into insanity. There's even, sex scenes in the book. And I think it just had a huge impact on me, and it never occurred to me that it was because it was written by a man that it could be any sort of less true as an experience. And I think I still sort of think about it. I still think about it now, and I wonder, is it any less valid? And obviously, there's people who would say that it is, but there was something very, very sort of felt very sort of vital and true about it, and it kind of made me, I think, it sort of laid a seed in me of the possibility of just writing this. Maybe there's not a huge amount of actual sort of narrative or plot, but just that sort of consistent sort of picture of what's going on inside a person's mind and body and in a moment has always sort of had an impact on me.
And Alison, is there anything that you want to add on this?
Yes, I'd like to echo what Dawn was saying about Brian Moore. His women characters are often fantastic. I think someone put in the chat about Judith Hearn. She's incredibly well realized, I suppose. And Colm Tóibín as well, I think, also writes women very well. One of my favorite books when I was a teenager was Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials trilogy. And I found Lyra to be very effectively well written as a teenager. But then I reread them a couple of years ago, and there's some very dodgy stuff when he gets into the last book and he starts talking about teenage girls' sexuality. And at that point I was like, no, you don't know what you're doing here, Philip. I would leave that. But that's just one example. As Dawn and Moira were saying, there are lots of people who can do it incredibly well. I think you got to be careful with age and gender and putting yourself in some people's shoes. I think you've just got to approach everything really carefully, I think.
I think Roddy Doyle would be another one, I would say, who has done some fantastic women's perspectives, including on domestic abuse. Though I think, I think really the kind of writing that we've got on violence against women and girls that really engages with it effectively, nearly all of the best of it is by women, but there are the odd honourable mentions. I guess something I would like more men to be writing about is male characters who are doing something to resist men's violence. And one of the ones that a character that I love and a writer I love is Kate Atkinson. I think is a absolutely fantastic, magical writer. But I love her character Jackson Brodie. I don't know if other people know that it's a detective series, and Jackson Brodie, his whole life is marked by the sexual murder of his sister and the suicide of his older brother, who was supposed to meet her off the bus and didn't meet her off the bus, and she got kidnapped and murdered. And he becomes, as a character, he wants to save women. Now, I don't necessarily say we can necessarily want men saving us, but I'd definitely rather have them saving us than raping us and killing us. So I think that I found that a very interesting character. So I think there are some women who are writing some very interesting male characters who challenge violence against women, but I don't think there's enough of them. Again, that was a bit cheeky chairs. Yeah, go ahead, Alison.
Sorry, just another shout out for Sue Divins, Guard Your Heart. Her teenage character Aidan is one of the best. I've never been a teenage boy, but is one of the best examples of boyhood I've read for a long time. He's so empathetic, or you empathize so much with him, and he's so fully realized. And even I don't know how to explain it better than that, but there's a question from Grania about care and about you need care to write about she says, so what's needed to write as another sex is care rather than direct experience? And I would say yes, definitely to that. I don't know what Moira and Dawn think. Sorry.
Just while you've mentioned Sue, can you just tell us when's her book coming out?
It's the 1st of April. I think she's actually here, or she was here earlier. So hi, Sue.
Well, shout out to Sue and good luck with the book. Okay, I'll maybe take one last question if anybody's got it, or if there isn't anything, if anybody wants to just, I guess if any of our panelists just have any kind of closing thoughts about women's writing and where it's going and how we encourage it.
I'll just Twitter a few quick things, actually allow Alison and Dawn to actually are working on contemporary. So I just say that, you know, certainly it's completely unscientific comment, and it's not something I've thought in an academic way at all, but I do find that when I choose material to read for pleasure, you know, beyond kind of what I'm doing for teaching and research, I am drawn to women writers, contemporary women writers, and I've never, I don't think I'm doing that consciously. It is genuinely what I enjoy, but I am also concerned about obsolescence and how things go out of print. I think that I'm maybe more hopeful with technology and pay to print and so on, that, you know, books being out of print will become a thing of the past. But it does worry me. It makes it very difficult for me to teach a lot of the women's writing I teach, because there were actually some fantastic new editions with, you know, Pandora Press, Virago Press, even the major publishers like Oxford, and Broadview is a brilliant press in Canada, but it's very hard to get their editions. And increasingly, it's very difficult for me to teach the material I would like to teach because it's just not currently in print. And I have a 12-year-old daughter. My youngest is a 12-year-old daughter, and she's got some learning difficulties. So I'm back to reading with her and really, really enjoying it. And I was telling Alison that I've been reading the Joan Lingard, for example, and we've read the first 4 of the 5 now. She absolutely loves them as a 12-year-old girl growing up in Belfast. But the last 2 books are out of print. So we're sourcing them as secondhand copies. So that's a worry. That worries me about how quickly things can disappear. I say that as somebody who works in the 18th century, that really these women are really not known, you know. So.
Any final comments from Dawn and Alison?
Dawn, do you want to? I feel like I've.
Sorry, no, I was having mute issues. No, I don't know. To be honest, I am consciously reading women writers, and I'm actively seeking them out. It's no accident. I think that I have only probably read books by women the past all through lockdown. Prior to lockdown, you know, people like, I'm picking up books of like Doireann na Griffa, you know, an Irish poet and writer who writes so well about motherhood. I've started reading the short stories of Joy Williams. There's a book called Honored Guest, you know, where she, you know, her first book is actually about sort of suicidal thoughts, and her mom has cancer. You know, these are kind of like Deborah Levy's work, which I've just sort of discovered quite recently as well. I would say Denise Riley, I've been kind of making my way through. She's a woman who writes about grief, the loss of a child, a critic, you know, and a creative writer and a poet as well. And these are the stories that I want to read, and these are the stories I think that it's important that we all do read, because what they do is they kind of open the door and allow me to think that's okay to write about that. And I don't know about anybody else, but I think that I need some kind of permission sometimes to write about things that maybe other people think, well, why would you think that? But I think for a lot of women, we kind of compress our experiences, and we sort of keep them within us. And for me, it's been so important to see the writing of people like, you know, Leontia Flynn, even stretching back as far as like playwrights like Sarah Kane, you know, who wrote about extremely brutal plays about mental health, about, you know, these all played their role in me getting to where I am now. I am actually very bored, to be perfectly honest, with seeing stories written by men, with the stories on you know, with a lot of exceptions, and a lot of male writing's been very important to me as well, but in the main, watching Amazon, you know, I was watching a movie there last week, and it was about it's called Greenland, and it was a kind of disaster movie about a meteor hitting the earth, and everyone had to try to like find a way to get to safety. But the story underpinning that was the story of a man who had an affair, and he'd let his family down, and the mom was struggling to do her best with the son, and he was trying to prove that he was a good man. He's trying to do right by her. And I just thought, I wonder, like, can you ever imagine a woman, sort of a story where there's a woman who's had an affair and now she's trying to like battle her way back, and prove that she's worthy of a role at the head of the house, you know. So no, the answer is no, you don't. And I think I've reached an age now, I'm 43, and I just roll my eyes, and I feel like I just cling on for dear life to the hope of seeing more and more women's stories just coming, people coming forward. And I think I see guys who've written in the comments, and I haven't had a chance to reply, but saying like, you know, is it okay if I write poetry, or is it okay if I write prose? Is anything seen as better or worse than another? And I would just say, just put your words down and don't worry about what sort of form that is, or what people will think of it, or whether that's good enough. You know, it's just important to do that, and take strength from women who've gone before, I think. And for me, that's why women's writing is important.
Well, I think that is a fantastic place to end. Could people unmute yourselves? And I'd just like to thank all of our fantastic speakers tonight. So thank you so much to Moira and Dawn and Alison.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And there's two last events. If you're still here, there's one event like tomorrow night, which there's still a few tickets left for our storytelling event. So if you want to get tickets, you can get them on Eventbrite. But it's been great seeing all of you, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone else.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Kelly,
Hi.
Moira, Dawn, and Alison.
I was just going to hope that the recording worked.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed indeed. Thanks so much, all of you. Honestly, I find that really, really so interesting. So I really appreciate your involvement.
Hilary, do you want to save the chat, or will I?
I'll save the chat, because then I can add it to the ones I've got. Thanks very much.
Perfect. No bother. Yeah, perfect.
And thank you so much. And I should have thought I should have thanked you for your help. I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Oh, no, it was
Sorry,
nice. It was a pleasure to be here and hear all of that. It was fascinating. It was absolutely spot on. Perfect. A lot to follow up.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah. I need to have a chat with you at some point, obviously, too. So many people I need to talk to.
Yeah. So where are you at with your work?
I'm in my second year. It's a novel. So PhD at Ulster.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of going through that process of the creative and the critical. What about yourself? What's yours?
I'm in my last year.
And you write